what the blood pressure number you worry about most isn't actually the one putting you at risk. If you're over 40, chances are you've had your blood pressure checked dozens of times. You see two numbers, one on top, one on the bottom, and almost instinctively, your eyes go straight to the top number. That's the one most people talk about. That's the one many seniors are told to fear. But what if that focus is quietly misleading you? Here's the uncomfortable truth. For millions of seniors, the real danger doesn't always come from the number they've been trained to watch. In fact, years of observations in cardiology and aging research have shown that as the body gets older, blood pressure behaves very differently than it does in youth. Arteries stiffen, blood flow patterns change, and the meaning behind those two numbers quietly shifts. Yet most people are never told this. They're given a single target, a single warning, and often a single sense of fear. That fear can lead to confusion, unnecessary stress, and in some cases, choices that don't truly support long-term health or independence. This is not about panic, and it's certainly not about ignoring blood pressure. It's about understanding it correctly for your stage of life. Because here's what researchers who study aging populations have noticed over decades of follow-up. Seniors who live longer, stay mentally sharp, and remain physically independent don't just look at one number in isolation. They understand how the two numbers work together. And more importantly, they know which one deserves closer attention as the body ages. By the end of this video, you'll have that clarity too. You'll understand what systolic and diastolic pressure really represent inside your body, how aging changes their meaning, and which number can quietly become more dangerous for seniors when misunderstood. Not in a dramatic way, not in a frightening way, but in a clear, empowering way that helps you ask better questions and feel more confident about your health. Before we go any further, take a moment and join the conversation. In the comments below, share your age and, if you remember it, your most recent blood pressure reading. Even if you're not sure of the exact numbers, that's okay. This helps others watching realize they're not alone, and it helps us keep this discussion grounded in real life. Now, let's start by breaking down what those two numbers actually mean in plain, everyday language, and why seniors need to understand them differently than everyone else. Before you can understand which blood pressure number matters more as you age, you need a clear picture of what those two numbers actually mean. Most confusion and a lot of unnecessary fear comes from the fact that these numbers are rarely explained in plain language. You're often just told whether they're good or bad, without being told what's really happening inside your body. Let's change that. When your blood pressure is taken, you see two numbers written like this, something over something. The top number is called systolic pressure. This is the pressure inside your arteries at the moment your heart contracts and pushes blood forward. Think of it like a wave. Every time your heart beats, it sends a surge of blood through your vessels. The systolic number reflects how strong that surge is. The bottom number is called diastolic pressure. This is the pressure in your arteries when your heart relaxes between beats. It represents the baseline pressure that's always there, even when your heart is resting. If systolic pressure is a wave, diastolic pressure is the water level the wave is moving through. A simple way to picture this is to imagine water flowing through a garden hose. When you squeeze the nozzle, pressure rises. That's similar to systolic pressure during a heartbeat. When you release the nozzle, water still flows, but at a calmer, steadier pressure. That's diastolic pressure. Both are important, and both tell different stories about how your circulation is working. You probably heard terms like normal high or low blood pressure. Broadly speaking, these labels are used to describe how hard your blood is pushing against your artery walls. Higher numbers mean more pressure. Lower numbers mean less. But here's where many people get confused. These categories were originally developed by observing large groups of adults, many of them younger or middle-aged. They were never meant to be interpreted the same way for everyone, at every stage of life. As you get older, your blood vessels naturally change. They tend to become less elastic. That alone can cause the top number to rise, even if your overall circulation is stable. At the same time, the bottom number may stay the same or even drift lower. This is one of the main reasons blood pressure readings in seniors often look very different from those in younger adults. Understanding this is important because it sets the stage for a much bigger question. If both numbers change with age, should they be judged the same way they were when you were 30 or 40? And more importantly, is the number you've been told to fear actually the one that deserves the most attention later in life? That's what we're going to explore next. For many years, doctors believed they were looking at the right blood pressure number. And to be fair, at the time, they were. To understand why, you have to go back to how blood pressure research originally began. Early studies were designed around middle-aged adults, factory workers, and military populations. These were younger bodies with flexible arteries and strong cardiovascular systems. In those groups, the bottom number, diastolic pressure, turned out to be a reliable warning sign. When it stayed high, it often meant the blood vessels were under constant strain, even when the heart was at rest. That made it an early marker for future heart problems. So doctors focused on it. Medical training reinforced it. And for decades, the message was simple. If the bottom number is high, something is wrong. That thinking wasn't careless. It was logical, based on the data available at the time. But here's the part that rarely gets explained. As medicine advanced, that original framework was quietly carried forward, even as the population aged and the average patient became much older than the people those early studies were based on. As you age, your arteries don't behave the same way they did in your 30s or 40s. The elastic, spring-like quality that once absorbed pressure gradually fades. Vessel walls stiffen. The pulse wave from each heartbeat starts traveling faster and reflecting differently through the arterial system. This changes how pressure is distributed between the top and bottom numbers. In younger adults, high diastolic pressure often signals constant resistance in the blood vessels. In older adults, that same number may no longer rise in the same way, even when risk is increasing elsewhere. Meanwhile, systolic pressure begins to climb, not necessarily because the heart is failing, but because the arteries themselves are less able to cushion each beat. This shift created a gap between old beliefs and new realities. Many seniors were told their blood pressure was fine because the bottom number looked acceptable, even as the top number quietly rose year after year. Others became anxious when their diastolic pressure dropped slightly, without understanding that aging itself can change what normal looks like. If you've ever felt confused by mixed messages about your blood pressure, this is not your fault. You were given advice rooted in an earlier era of medicine, applied to a body that has naturally changed over time. The good news is that modern research didn't discard the old understanding. It refined it. By following older adults over many years, researchers began to see a clearer pattern emerge, one that looks very different from what was taught decades ago. And that discovery leads us directly to the number that deserves closer attention for seniors today. As you move past 50, something subtle but important begins to happen inside your body. It's not something you can feel right away. It doesn't cause pain, and it often doesn't show up as obvious symptoms. But over time, it quietly changes what your blood pressure numbers really mean. This is where systolic pressure, the top number, starts to deserve much closer attention. As you age, your arteries naturally become stiffer. When you're younger, these vessels are flexible, almost elastic. Each time your heart beats, the arteries expand slightly, absorbing part of that force. This cushioning effect keeps pressure balanced. But with age, that flexibility gradually fades. The artery walls don't stretch as easily, so each heartbeat sends a stronger pressure wave forward. That stronger wave shows up as a higher systolic number. This rise doesn't necessarily mean your heart is weak or failing. In many cases, it means your heart is working against vessels that no longer soften the impact the way they once did. Large observational studies that followed older adults over many years began to notice something important. Seniors with consistently higher systolic pressure were more likely to experience strokes, strain on a heart muscle, and changes in brain circulation, even when their diastolic number looked acceptable. What makes this especially concerning is how quiet it can be. You might feel completely fine. You might walk, garden, socialize, and sleep well. There's often no immediate warning sign that systolic pressure is creeping upward. That's why it's sometimes called a silent risk. It doesn't announce itself with pain or discomfort. It simply accumulates year after year. For many seniors, learning this can feel unsettling at first. After all, you may have been reassured for years that your blood pressure was under control. But awareness is not meant to create fear. It's meant to replace uncertainty with understanding. Once you know why systolic pressure rises with age, it becomes easier to view the number as information, not a verdict. And here's the reassuring part. Recognizing systolic pressure as a key signal allows for smarter conversations, better monitoring, and more thoughtful decisions. It shifts the focus from reacting late to understanding early. That clarity alone can reduce anxiety and restore a sense of control. But just when many people start thinking the solution is to push blood pressure as low as possible, another important discovery comes into view. Because in seniors, lower is not always safer. This brings us to the insight that surprises most people. For years, the message around blood pressure was simple: lower is better. And in many situations, that idea made sense. But as researchers began studying older adults more closely, they noticed a pattern that didn't fit the old rule. In seniors, very low diastolic pressure can sometimes create its own set of problems. Remember, diastolic pressure represents the resting pressure in your arteries between heartbeats. This resting pressure plays a crucial role in supplying blood to vital organs, especially the brain and the heart itself. When diastolic pressure drops too low, there may not be enough steady flow during those resting moments. In practical terms, this can show up as dizziness when standing, fatigue that seems out of proportion to activity, balance problems, or a feeling of mental fog. Some seniors notice they feel weaker or less steady, even though their readings are labeled excellent. Long-term observations in aging populations have suggested that overly aggressive lowering of blood pressure can, in certain individuals, reduce perfusion to sensitive tissues. This doesn't mean diastolic pressure should be high. It means it shouldn't be driven down without considering how the person feels and functions. This is where confusion often sets in. You're told to aim lower, but your body seems to protest. That doesn't mean something is wrong with you. It means your circulatory system is responding to age-related changes that weren't fully appreciated in earlier guidelines. The key insight here is balance. Healthy blood pressure in seniors is not about chasing the lowest possible numbers. It's about maintaining enough pressure to support the brain, muscles, and organs while avoiding excess strain on the heart and vessels. Understanding this can be empowering. It helps you move away from fear-based thinking and toward informed awareness. Lower is not always better. Balance is often safer. So what does balance actually look like after 60? This is where the idea of a senior balance zone becomes helpful. As you get older, there is no single perfect blood pressure number that applies to everyone. Two people the same age can have different healthy ranges depending on their activity level, symptoms, and overall resilience. That's why modern thinking focuses less on rigid targets and more on how numbers align with daily function. An age-adjusted safe zone takes into account how you feel, not just what the cuff reports. Are you steady on your feet? Do you have the energy to move through your day? Is your thinking clear? These signals matter just as much as the numbers themselves. Researchers who study aging emphasize that blood pressure should support life, not restrict it. A reading that looks ideal on paper but leaves you lightheaded or fatigued may not be ideal for you. On the other hand, a slightly higher number that allows you to stay active, alert, and independent may be more supportive of long-term health. This understanding encourages a different kind of conversation. Instead of asking, "Is this number perfect?" the better question becomes, "Is this number helping me live well?" When you understand your own patterns, you gain leverage. You can describe how you feel, not just what the monitor says. That kind of clarity replaces fear with confidence. It allows you to participate actively in decisions about your health, rather than feeling talked at or rushed. And it also reminds you of something important. Blood pressure is not a snapshot. It's a story told over time. Which brings us to what matters beyond the cuff. One blood pressure reading, taken on one day, does not define your health. Stress, sleep, hydration, and even the time of day can influence the result. What matters far more is consistency and trend. When researchers look at long-term outcomes, they don't focus on isolated numbers. They look at patterns. They ask whether blood pressure is stable, gradually changing, or fluctuating wildly. Those patterns often tell a clearer story than any single measurement. Daily habits quietly shape these trends. Gentle movement keeps vessels responsive. Adequate hydration supports circulation. Quality sleep allows the nervous system to reset. Managing stress helps prevent unnecessary spikes. None of these need to be extreme. Small, steady behaviors influence both systolic and diastolic pressure over time. If you're finding this information helpful so far, take a moment to like the video and consider subscribing. We focus on clear senior-centered health insights designed to reduce confusion and build confidence, one topic at a time. The key takeaway here is perspective. Blood pressure is a tool, not a judgment. When you view it in context, it becomes less intimidating and more informative. And that brings us to the most important question of all. Instead of asking which blood pressure number is worse, seniors may benefit more from asking, are my numbers supporting my life and independence? Systolic pressure deserves attention because it often rises silently with age and reflects changes in the arteries. Diastolic pressure deserves respect because if it drops too low, it can affect balance, energy, and mental clarity. Neither number exists in isolation. Together, they tell a story about how well your circulation is meeting your body's needs. What surprises many people is realizing that understanding matters more than chasing perfection. When you understand what your numbers represent, you can respond calmly instead of reacting with fear. As we close, reflect for a moment. Which number surprised you more in today's discussion, the top or the bottom? And have you ever felt symptoms even when your blood pressure readings were labeled normal? Share your thoughts in the comments. These conversations help others feel less alone and more informed. Remember, clarity leads to confidence, and confidence supports healthier aging, one informed decision at a time.